I never thought I could destroy the heart of the man who loved me with something so small, something that seemed like just a joke, but in reality carried a cruelty I didn't even have the courage to admit. Sometimes we speak without thinking, believing that laughing about something intimate is just a way of showing closeness, but I found out the hard way that words can be sharp weapons. Today, when I look back, I can still see that scene replaying before my eyes like a nightmare. The room full of voices, the table set, the family gathered, and me, right there in the middle of it all, trying to be witty, trying to get attention, trying to make everyone laugh. And I did. Everyone laughed, except him. The laughter that echoed in that room turned into the silence that has followed me ever since. In the very instant the words slipped from my mouth, I saw his eyes close off, like a door being locked forever. It was quick, but it was deep. I knew I had crossed the line, but I never imagined that would be the beginning of the end. The trust that had taken years to build collapsed in seconds. From that day on, nothing was the same. The emptiness he left behind was not only in the house, but inside me. I carry the guilt of turning a secret into a joke, of hurting the one who always cared for me. This is the story of how a single phrase can rip away a lifetime of affection, and it is also my most painful confession. Maybe you will understand the weight I carry. Maybe you will recognize yourself in some part of this pain, but I need to tell you everything until the end. And if you feel this story touches your heart, I ask you to stay with me until the very last moment, to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because this confession is not just mine. It is a reminder of how much we can lose when we don't know how to measure our words. It happened so fast that even now, when I try to reconstruct the scene in my mind, I can barely believe it was me who said those words. The room was filled with laughter and the warmth of family gathered together, the clinking of glasses, plates being passed around, and everyone relaxed as if nothing in the world could touch that evening. And then there was me, smiling too wide, trying to ride the wave of the moment, trying to make myself stand out, as if proving to everyone that I could turn even the most serious thing into something lighthearted. The conversation had turned to relationships and intimacy, and without thinking, wanting to be funny, I leaned in and said, if you really want to know, the problem at home isn't a lack of love, it's that sometimes my husband doesn't even last as long as a TV commercial. The table erupted into laughter. My uncles chuckled loudly, my cousins covered their faces, and even my mother let out a nervous laugh. But when I looked at him, there was no humor at all. He froze, his fork suspended in midair, his eyes fixed on me like I had just torn something sacred from his chest. That silence weighed heavier than all the laughter around me. And in that moment, I realized I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I felt the heat of embarrassment rush to my cheeks, not for what I had said, but for the damage I had done. And yet, I stayed silent, letting the evening continue as if nothing had happened, while inside, I was crumbling. If I close my eyes now, I can still hear the echoes of laughter, but it no longer sounds like laughter. It sounds like knives piercing me. I knew, as he knew, that something between us had shattered. When he finally put down his fork and quietly stood up, my world tilted. He walked out without a word, and the sound of the door closing behind him reverberated louder than any laugh in that room. One moment can divide your life into before and after, leaving you bleeding on both sides, and that was mine. That was the moment when the silence started to live inside me. I tried to smile, to act normally in front of everyone else, but all I could see was his back disappearing from view, and that image has haunted me every day since. Sometimes I ask myself why I did it. Why did I need to make him a character for everyone else's amusement? Was I trying to impress them? Was I proving something to myself? Or was I just careless with something too sacred to ever touch? I don't have the answer, but I know the cost. And I wonder if you were sitting at that table in my place, what would you have done? Would you have stopped the laughter, apologized in front of everyone? Or would you, like me, have frozen in shame? Please, if you can, tell me in the comments, because sometimes I feel so alone carrying this weight, and maybe hearing your thoughts could help me see what I should have done differently. The truth is, I felt the emptiness even before he left the house. The moment he walked out of that dining room, a part of me went with him. I stayed behind, forcing smiles, nodding at meaningless words, my chest tight, barely able to breathe. Every sound blurred. Voices faded. Food lost all taste. I was drowning in the realization that I had shattered something precious, something fragile I had taken for granted. And yet I said nothing. I let the night play out as if nothing had changed, when in reality, everything had. Later, when the house grew quiet and everyone had gone home, I sat alone at the table, staring at the empty chair where he had been. I traced the outline of his glass, still half full, as if it contained the ghost of him. That silence pressed down harder than anything else. I could still see the hurt in his eyes, replaying over and over like a cruel reminder of what I had taken from us. It wasn't just a joke. It wasn't just one careless moment. It was a betrayal of trust, a crack in the foundation of our marriage, and I knew deep down that even if he came back through that door, things would never be the same. When the door closed behind him, it was not just the sound of wood against the frame. It was the sound of something final, something that told me I had just lost more than I could even understand at that moment. The house felt different immediately. Even though there were still voices around, the absence of his presence pressed down like a shadow. I tried to distract myself, to force conversations with my relatives, but my ears were tuned only to the silence he left behind. Later, when I finally returned home, the weight of what I had done came crashing down with every step. The house was dark, and for a moment I hoped I would find him waiting inside, maybe angry, maybe distant, but still there. Instead, his shoes by the door were gone. His jacket was not hanging on the chair where it always was. The emptiness was everywhere, in every corner, and I realized I was alone. That first night without him, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my hand instinctively reaching for his side of the bed, only to touch the cold sheets. I kept waiting for a message, a call, even a word, but nothing came. The silence was unbearable. My mind replayed the scene over and over, the look in his eyes, the way he stood up, the door closing. I kept whispering, "I'm sorry," into the empty room, as if the walls could carry my words to him. But the house didn't answer. Days turned into a blur. I went through the motions of life, but every object reminded me of him. His coffee mug on the counter, the book he had left open on the sofa, the smell of his cologne still lingering faintly in the closet. It was like he was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I tried to tell myself he would come back, that he just needed space, but with each passing day, hope shrank a little more. I began to understand the magnitude of what I had done. I had not just embarrassed him, I had betrayed his trust in the most intimate way possible. Trust is like glass. Once it cracks, no matter how hard you try to fix it, the lines remain. I started questioning myself endlessly. Why didn't I stop the words before they came out? Why didn't I apologize in front of everyone right then? Why did I choose pride and laughter over love? The questions ate at me, and I found no answers, only regret. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one morning, staring at my phone, wondering if I should call him, beg him to come back, but fear paralyzed me. Fear that he would not answer. Fear that, even if he did, the voice on the other end would be cold, distant, a stranger's voice where once there had been love. And yet, not trying felt like another betrayal, like I was letting the silence consume everything. I typed messages and deleted them, wrote long confessions and erased them, because nothing seemed enough to undo what I had done. And maybe there was nothing that could. At night, when the house was quiet, the weight of his absence was heaviest. I would walk through the rooms, touching the things he had touched, hoping to feel him again somehow. I sat in his chair, wrapped myself in the blanket he used, but nothing filled the void. It was not the objects I missed. It was the warmth of his presence, the sound of his laughter, even the small arguments that now felt like treasures I had wasted. That's when I understood that sometimes the real punishment is not what others do to you, but what you do to yourself, the way guilt gnaws at you until you can barely recognize who you are anymore. And the cruelest part of it all was knowing that I had no one else to blame but myself. The days that followed felt like a blur, but the memory of that night stayed sharp, cutting me again and again every time I let my guard down. I could see his face in my mind, that quiet devastation in his eyes, and it haunted me more than any argument or scream ever could. Silence can be more violent than words, and his silence echoed through my chest, louder than any noise in the world. I tried to keep myself busy, cleaning the house, distracting my mind with meaningless tasks, but everywhere I looked there were reminders of him. The sweater draped over the chair, the half-read book on the nightstand, the empty space on the dresser where he usually dropped his watch. I felt like I was living with a ghost, but the ghost wasn't him. It was me, the version of myself that had existed before I broke something sacred. Guilt grew inside me like a shadow, spreading until it covered everything. At first, I told myself I could fix it, that if I gave him time, if I explained, maybe he would understand. But then doubt crept in, whispering that there are wounds no apology can ever heal. I began to replay every word I had spoken, every laugh that followed, every glance exchanged at that table. The sound of my family laughing now rang in my ears like a cruel chorus, and I wished I could gather them all again just to take back those words, to erase the memory from everyone's minds. But life doesn't give us rewinds, only consequences. Nights were the worst. I lay in bed with my body heavy and my mind racing, staring at the empty space beside me, waiting for a sound that never came. I whispered apologies into the dark, but the silence swallowed them whole. I prayed for him to walk back through the door, even if it was only to yell at me, to release the anger I knew he must be carrying. But he didn't. And every day he stayed away, my guilt twisted deeper, becoming something almost unbearable. Regret has a way of making time stretch. Minutes became hours became days, and all of them were filled with the same thought. I destroyed what we had. There were moments when I wanted to scream at myself, to shake myself awake from this nightmare, but there was no waking up because it was real. I thought of how he had trusted me with his most vulnerable truth, how he had let me into the part of himself that he showed no one else, and how I had thrown it back at him as a punchline. I had taken his trust and broken it in front of the very people whose respect mattered to him, and that kind of wound goes deeper than I ever imagined. I started writing letters I never sent, pouring my guilt onto paper, because at least then I could feel like I was talking to him. I wrote about the way I missed his laughter, the way I missed his presence in the house, the way I missed simply knowing he was near. I begged for forgiveness on those pages, knowing he would never read them, but it was the only way to breathe through the weight pressing on my chest. Sometimes I imagined him reading them, imagined his face softening, imagined him walking back through the door. Other times, the image was darker. I imagined him gone for good, starting over somewhere else, leaving me behind with nothing but regret. The uncertainty ate at me until I could hardly function. People around me tried to talk, to comfort me, but how could I explain? How could I tell them I had ruined my marriage with one careless sentence? Shame kept me silent, just as guilt kept me trapped. And in that silence, I realized the cruelest truth of all. Forgiveness might never come, and even if it did, some scars never fade. The house became unbearable. Every corner seemed louder in its silence, every shadow heavier, without him there to fill it. I never realized how much life he carried into our home until he was gone. The smallest details cut the deepest. The way the floorboards didn't creak anymore at night, the way the kettle never whistled in the morning because I stopped making tea for two, the way the lights seemed dimmer no matter how bright they shone. I tried to live, to keep up appearances, but it felt like I was pretending to be alive while something inside me had already died. Friends and family asked questions I didn't know how to answer. Where is he? When is he coming back? I smiled faintly, gave vague responses, but inside my chest it felt like a knife turning slowly. I was ashamed of what I had done, ashamed of admitting that I had destroyed my marriage with my own hands, with my own voice. So I chose silence, but silence is a cruel companion. It doesn't comfort, it amplifies. At night, when the world outside was quiet, I would lie awake listening to the empty house, waiting for sounds that would never come. Sometimes I thought I heard the door open, footsteps in the hallway, his voice calling my name, but it was only my mind playing tricks, desperate for his presence. Loneliness has a way of reshaping everything. Food lost its taste. Music sounded hollow. Even my own reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar, like a stranger staring back, a woman aged years in a matter of weeks. I began avoiding mirrors, avoiding myself, because facing what I had become was unbearable. My heart carried a constant weight, a pressure that made breathing feel like work. I wondered where he was, what he was doing, if he was thinking about me at all, or if he had already erased me from his world. The thought of him building a life without me tore at my insides, but I couldn't blame him. If I were him, I might have done the same. And yet, despite knowing this, I still clung to hope, fragile and foolish as it was. Hope that he might wake up one day and decide to forgive me. Hope that the love we once had would outweigh the hurt I caused. But hope is a double-edged sword. It kept me breathing, but it also kept me chained, unable to move forward. Every morning I checked my phone, waiting for a message that never appeared, and every night I went to bed with the same emptiness gnawing at me. I started to dream of him, vivid dreams where he was next to me again, where his hand touched mine, where his voice whispered forgiveness. Those dreams felt real, almost too real, and waking up was the cruelest part of my days. Because reality was the exact opposite: cold sheets, silence, absence. I talked to him in my head constantly, rehearsing apologies, explanations, confessions. I imagined what I would say if he stood in front of me again, how I would fall to my knees if that was what it took, how I would promise to never, ever hurt him again. But imagining and living are two very different things, and reality gave me nothing but the echo of my regret. I started writing in a journal, not because it healed me, but because the pages were the only place I could pour everything I couldn't say aloud. I filled them with guilt, with sorrow, with longing. Sometimes I begged him for forgiveness on those pages. Other times I begged myself to let him go, but neither ever came. Forgiveness didn't arrive, and letting go felt impossible. The more days passed, the more the silence became part of me, and the more I realized I was becoming a shadow in my own life. And maybe that's the cruelest thing loneliness does. It doesn't just take away the person you love, it takes away who you are when you're with them. I reached a point where I could no longer endure the silence, where just existing in the emptiness of our home felt like slowly drowning. That was when I began trying to reach out, even though I didn't know if he would ever want to hear my voice again. The first message I wrote sat unsent on my phone for hours. I typed and deleted, until my hands shook. What words could possibly carry the weight of my regret? "I'm sorry" felt like ashes in my mouth, too small for the fire I had caused. Still, I pressed send one night, and then I stared at the screen, waiting for a reply that never came. Days passed. I wrote again, this time longer, trying to explain, trying to show him that I understood the depth of my mistake. Again, silence. His silence was more powerful than any words he could have given me, because in it lived both his pain and his decision to keep me at a distance. But I didn't stop. I left voicemails he never answered, little fragments of myself spilled into the void. Sometimes I would talk as though he were listening, telling him about the weather, about how quiet the house was, about how much I missed the sound of his footsteps. Other times, I broke down in tears, begging him to come back, to let me at least see him, to let me try. I know it sounds pathetic, and maybe it was, but desperation doesn't follow dignity. It follows the cracks in your heart until you're willing to bleed anywhere if it means you might be seen again. I even went to the places we used to go together, hoping by some miracle I'd run into him. The cafe where he always ordered the same coffee, the park bench where we once sat for hours talking about nothing, the grocery store where he used to tease me for buying too many snacks. But he wasn't there. Instead, those places reminded me of the life we had built, the small routines that had been ours, and how I had shattered it all with one cruel moment of thoughtlessness. One night, after writing yet another letter I knew I wouldn't send, I sat on the floor surrounded by all the remnants of him that remained in the house. His shirt still smelled faintly like him, though the scent was fading, and I held it against my face until my chest hurt from sobbing. That was when I realized that maybe my reaching out wasn't just about him. It was also about me clinging to a version of myself that no longer existed, the wife who still had him, the woman who hadn't yet destroyed everything. My attempts to reconnect were like throwing messages into the ocean, hoping one would find its way back to shore, but all I ever saw was the endless tide carrying them away. Still, I couldn't stop. Each unsent letter, each unanswered message, each unanswered call was a way of keeping a thread tied between us, even if it was frayed, even if I was the only one holding on. Deep down, I knew that no amount of words could undo what I had done, but silence was unbearable, and I had to try, even if trying only meant falling deeper into the pit of my own regret. The truth is, I didn't just miss him, I missed myself with him, the person I was when his love was still mine. And I feared that without him, that version of me might never exist again. Time moved forward, but I remained stuck in the same place, trapped between the memory of what was and the silence of what now is. I tried to convince myself that one day the ache would dull, that the weight pressing on my chest would ease, but instead it became part of me, like a second skin I could never remove. I started to see life differently, not in the way of someone who is healed, but in the way of someone who carries a wound that never closes. Every couple I saw walking hand in hand felt like a reflection of the life I had once held and thrown away. Every laugh, every shared glance between strangers reminded me of how carelessly I mocked the man who once gave me his trust, and how much that betrayal cost me. I learned, too late, that words are not harmless, that even something said in jest can cut deeper than a blade when it strikes at the heart of someone you love. And now, all I am left with is this endless cycle of reliving that moment, of replaying his face when the laughter stopped and the silence grew heavy enough to break us. If I could turn back time, I would hold my tongue, I would hold his hand instead, I would tell him how much I loved him in front of everyone instead of letting my pride and carelessness take the lead. But time does not move backward, and forgiveness does not come when you demand it. It comes, if ever, as a fragile gift freely given. And I know he may never choose to give it to me. Sometimes I wonder if he found peace without me, if he built a life where laughter doesn't hurt, where love feels safe again. I hope he did, even if that means I will forever remain outside of it, watching only from the distance of memory. Because love, I've realized, is not only about what we receive, it is about what we give, and I failed to give him the respect and tenderness he deserved when he needed it most. That failure will mark me for the rest of my days, and maybe that is the price I have to pay. But still, inside me, there is a whisper, a longing that refuses to die. Perhaps it is foolish, but I cling to the hope that telling this story may keep his memory alive in some way, that speaking of my loss may help someone else guard their love more carefully than I did. And maybe, through these words, I will not be completely forgotten. If you've stayed with me through this, please let me ask something from the bottom of my heart. Subscribe to this channel, not just for me, but as a way of keeping these stories alive. Stories that remind us of love, of pain, of mistakes that cannot be undone but must be remembered. Leave a comment, too. Tell me what you felt, what you think, or even what you would have done in my place. Your words matter, because every voice helps preserve memories and gives meaning to the lives of those who suffered in silence. And if you wish to walk further with me through these echoes of the past, watch the other stories on this channel, especially the ones I've placed together in the playlist. You'll find the link in the description or in the pinned comment. These are not just stories, they are pieces of lives that should not be lost. By staying, listening, and remembering, you help carry them forward, and for that, I am deeply grateful.